Failing to frame the pregnant wife, Mistress slaps her. The millionaire husband stops her just in time. A whirlwind of secrets, power, and impossible dreams threatens to tear one family apart until an unexpected hero steps forward. In this riveting tale, Cinderella isn't just a fairy tale figure. She's a modern woman caught in a web of decay. It's spun by a jealous mistress, determined to seize fortune and status for herself. When a ruthless slap nearly crushes Cinderella's spirit, a protective millionaire husband intervenes just in time. Love, betrayal, and redemption clash beneath the glittering lights of high society. Brace yourself for a roller coaster of emotions, hidden agendas, and courageous hearts that refuse to surrender. This is a story you'll never forget. Cinderella was not her real name, of course. Her parents had named her Cynthia Elaine Robles, but all her life, friends and family teased her affectionately by calling her Cinderella. At first, it was a playful nickname because she was gentle in spirit and forever loved to dance. As years passed, however, it took on a second meaning. She grew up surrounded by the gloom of a broken family and, at times, found solace imagining she was the Cinderella from fairy tales who would eventually find her own bright future. But this is not the simple story of a girl in rags who meets a prince at a ball. Instead, this story unfolds in the lavish domain of a sprawling mansion located just outside the city of Greenwich Hills. Here, Cynthia lived with her father, Hector Robles, a self-made millionaire known for his philanthropic ventures, and a man whose heart had grown heavy with grief after losing his wife, Cynthia's mother, to a sudden illness. Hector was determined to keep his daughter safe, showering her with love and everything money could buy. Yet all the wealth in the world couldn't fill the void left by her mother's passing. When Cynthia was 18, her father remarried. In a swirl of public fascination, paparazzi cameras, and society gossip, Hector wed Naomi Bordeaux, a younger woman from a prominent family. Naomi arrived like a whirlwind, wearing designer gowns to breakfast and criticizing household staff for the slightest lapses. She brought with her an air of ostentation that might have dazzled many, but for Cynthia, it was jarring. Overnight, the quiet mansion became a stage for Naomi's endless parties and fancy gatherings. Despite Naomi's flamboyance, Cynthia tried to welcome her new stepmother with an open heart. She was prepared to share her father's attention and do whatever it took to adapt. But from the outset, Naomi saw Cynthia not as a sweet, gracious daughter, but as a threat. After all, Cynthia stood to inherit a substantial fortune when she turned 21, and Naomi wanted to ensure none of it slipped through her fingers. Determined to cement her place in the family's wealth, Naomi behaved more like an adversary than a maternal figure. Still, Hector seemed oblivious. He was enthralled by Naomi's charms, perhaps hoping that this second marriage would bring him some solace and happiness. He was too busy navigating his booming businesses and new philanthropic projects to notice the subtle ways. Naomi undermined Cynthia's confidence and stifled her joy. On the surface, the household maintained a veneer of order and politeness. Staff continued to follow Cynthia's soft-spoken directions, but they also glanced nervously at Naomi, keenly aware of the newcomer's foul temper and manipulative nature. While Naomi's petty malice simmered in the background, Cynthia found pockets of comfort in her life. She had a steadfast friend in Christine Delgado, a childhood companion from a neighboring estate. Christine was a brilliant law student with a knack for sniffing out injustice. Christine's unwavering support provided Cynthia with the courage to keep her head held high, even as Naomi's underhanded schemes began to intensify. Little did Cynthia know, a storm of colossal proportions was about to break over her life. The gentle girl who once believed wholeheartedly in fairy tale endings would soon be tested in ways she never imagined. No magic wands or fairy godmothers would appear, only real, human choices made in the face of deception and greed. In the midst of it all, a powerful man would eventually step forward in her defense, unveiling a truth far more dramatic than any story Cynthia had ever read. As the years progressed, the tension between Cynthia and Naomi grew more palpable. Cynthia, now 20, had blossomed into a kind-hearted young woman pursuing her passions. She volunteered at a local children's center, teaching dance classes and organizing small recitals to raise funds for disadvantaged youth. Her heart was all about giving back, an echo of her late mother's empathetic spirit. Naomi, for her part, was unraveling under the weight of her own envy. Although Hector was a generous husband, lavishing her with diamonds, exotic vacations, and the prestige of being Miss S. Robles, she could not rid herself of the gnawing worry that Cynthia, with her 21st birthday just months away, might overshadow her in the household and gain full control over a sizable trust fund. From the outside, Naomi was always dazzling. At every gala, she appeared in shimmering gowns, smiling for cameras, entertaining CIPs. But behind closed doors, she seethed whenever she saw Cynthia elegantly descending the marble staircase in a modest dress, her natural grace and kindness shining like an inner light. Naomi felt threatened, and that feeling fed her compulsion to manipulate everyone around her, including the household staff. To further complicate matters, Hector's business empire had doubled in scope over the last few years. He was on the brink of finalizing a new deal with major international partners. This deal meant Hector spent countless hours traveling and hosting late-night meetings, which left Naomi with ample opportunity to reign unchallenged over the mansion. One afternoon, Naomi conceived of a cunning plan. She persuaded Hector that Cynthia was no longer safe in her old bedroom because of an alleged structural issue, an excuse she manufactured from thin air. Naomi insisted it was urgent to move Cynthia into a smaller room in a distant wing of the mansion while the repairs were carried out. Hector, worrying for his daughter's safety, readily agreed. And so Cynthia found herself uprooted from the spacious suite she had cherished since childhood. She did not complain, though she felt an odd pang in her chest to leave the room that still housed so many of her mother's memories. In truth, the forced relocation was a small piece of Naomi's plan to ostracize Cynthia within her own home. Naomi put on a show of playing the concerned mother figure, pretending to watch over Cynthia's well-being. She assigned a new maid, Yvette, to look after the young woman. Yvette was a quiet, timid figure who walked on eggshells around Naomi. She followed every command diligently, no matter how unethical or biased it appeared. Amid these rearrangements, a new figure appeared on the stage, Jonathan Harrington, a suave young businessman who had partnered with Hector on a philanthropic project. Handsome, well-spoken, and hailing from an old money family, Jonathan was instantly drawn to Cynthia's warmth. He began spending time at the mansion, discussing future charity events and working closely with her to plan fundraisers. Their shared passion for helping children bonded them quickly, forming a bond of respect and camaraderie that lit a small spark in both hearts. Naomi watched them warily. Jonathan's interest in Cynthia stung her like an open wound. While Naomi had married Hector for security, she still craved validation from any desirable man within arm's reach. But Jonathan seemed uninterested in her carefully orchestrated flirtations, focusing instead on Cynthia's ideas and intelligence. Naomi's jealousy evolved into outright contempt, fueling her determination to destroy Cynthia's reputation if that's what it took to maintain her power. Soon, Naomi's cunning began to expand beyond the walls of the mansion. She started planting subtle rumors among the city's elite, whispering that Cynthia was manipulative, that her sweet demeanor was a carefully staged act. At gala dinners, Naomi would turn to her circle of well-coiffed friends and say, with affected concern, "I love Cynthia, but I worry about her ambition. She seems so eager to prove something." Those who didn't know Cynthia well began to accept Naomi's words at face value. A shadow of suspicion formed over Cynthia's otherwise spotless image, and Cynthia, unsuspecting, continued her life as usual. She danced with children at the community center, planned her birthday celebration with Christine, and worked alongside Jonathan on philanthropic projects. She never imagined that the rug could be pulled out from under her so swiftly, that the stage was being set for a terrible betrayal, one that would test her courage and integrity to their limits. Naomi's grand plan hinged on a singular ambition, turning Hector and the rest of society against Cynthia, leaving Naomi as the sole heir to the family's fortune and the apex of the Robles' social circle. She orchestrated each step carefully, using Yvette as her inside informant and an unsuspecting scapegoat if things went wrong. In the weeks leading up to Cynthia's 21st birthday, Naomi put her manipulative talents to work. She started by implementing strict rules that subtly restricted Cynthia's freedoms. For example, she insisted that Cynthia should stop visiting the children's center alone, claiming it was too dangerous for someone of her status. Naomi also pressured the staff to keep an eye on the young woman's activities, logging her comings and goings in a small notebook. Her excuse? For Cynthia's own safety. But in reality, these logs were meant to create a paper trail Naomi could twist to her advantage, painting Cynthia as reckless or irresponsible if the opportunity arose. One of Naomi's most cunning moves involved intercepting Cynthia's mail. Using the staff under her control, she gained access to letters, bills, and invitations addressed to Cynthia. Whenever something that could potentially damage Cynthia's reputation landed in their mailbox, like a misaddressed letter containing financial details about the trust fund, Naomi quickly claimed it. Accidentally fell into her hands. Then she would twist those details and spread half-truths to undermine Cynthia's character. She even tried to sabotage Cynthia's credit by ordering items in her name and returning them, incurring fees. Though minor in the grand scheme, these small pricks of sabotage were carefully orchestrated acts of war in Naomi's mind. Meanwhile, Christine Delgado noticed odd discrepancies in Cynthia's day-to-day life. Christine was no fool. Law school had taught her to question everything. Why was Cynthia suddenly missing important invitations to charitable events? Why had she started receiving notices for credit card bills she never opened? Christine confronted Cynthia with her suspicions, but Cynthia believed it must all be some big misunderstanding. She couldn't fathom that Naomi might be orchestrating a deliberate campaign to erode her reputation. Then came a pivotal moment, the annual Winter's Grace fundraiser at the Greenwick Grand Hotel. This event was a social apex, attended by the city's wealthiest families, celebrities, and politicians. Hector Robles was slated to give the keynote speech, and both Cynthia and Naomi had parts to play. Cynthia was to perform a choreographed dance with the children from her center, and Naomi would handle public relations and host the after-party. 2 days before the event, Naomi orchestrated a staged scene in the mansion's study. She asked Yvette to slip one of the precious Robles family heirlooms into Cynthia's purse. The plan was simple. Naomi would feign alarm and accuse Cynthia of stealing the heirloom. Naomi knew her stepdaughter's heart was pure and that the charges would be outrageous. But she hoped the shock and scandal would create doubt among onlookers and tarnish Cynthia's name just enough to disrupt her close bond with Hector and Jonathan. On the night of the so-called theft, Naomi put on a theatrical show, searching the entire house with exaggerated alarm. She declared that a diamond-studded necklace, one of Hector's beloved gifts, had gone missing. Staff members, wide-eyed and concerned, helped comb through each room while Cynthia stood on the sidelines, entirely baffled by the sudden panic. "I saw Miss Cynthia in the study earlier," Yvette said, her voice trembling with faux apprehension. She glanced at Naomi, who gave a subtle nod of approval. She was near the jewelry display. Cynthia's eyes widened. "I've never gone near that jewelry display," she protested calmly, though her heart was pounding. "Why would I even touch your necklace?" Naomi wore the mask of a grieving victim. "I don't want to accuse anyone wrongly," she said, her hand pressed to her chest. "But we must check everything. This necklace is priceless. My husband entrusted it to me." She directed a staff member to search Cynthia's belongings. Within minutes, the missing necklace was found in Cynthia's purse, exactly as Naomi had arranged. A hush fell over the staff. Christine, who happened to be visiting that evening, looked mortified, her suspicion growing by the second. Meanwhile, Cynthia was rendered speechless. She frantically tried to explain that she had no idea how the necklace got there. Yet the cold expressions from Naomi and the staff's uncertain glances weighed heavily in the air. Naomi nearly smirked at her success. The first step of her plan appeared to be unfolding perfectly. But fate had other designs. Hector, who had arrived home early from a business trip, walked into the hallway at the height of the commotion. He found Cynthia clutching the necklace, tears in her eyes, and Naomi standing before her like a righteous avenger. His confusion and concern were evident as he listened to the claims. Though Naomi's performance was convincing, Hector's paternal instinct did not waver. He did not want to leap to conclusions. After all, he had known Cynthia's heart since she was a child. For the moment, the matter ended with Hector demanding that everyone remain calm until he could investigate the situation thoroughly. Naomi had hoped for immediate outrage, but Hector's cautious approach dampened her victory. Still, the plan was in motion. Cynthia was now under suspicion, and Naomi's next steps could be even more destructive. The morning after the staged theft, tensions remained high in the Robles mansion. The staff tiptoed around, unsure whom to believe. Some had always admired Cynthia's kindness. Others felt compelled to align with Naomi, anxious not to lose their jobs. Hector locked the necklace in his study and prepared to question everyone involved, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. But Cynthia, emotionally drained and mortified, chose a different path. She slipped out of the mansion early, heading to the local cafe where she often met Christine. Christine was already seated in a corner booth, looking up at Cynthia with worried eyes. "You look exhausted," Christine said gently, as Cynthia slid into the seat opposite her. "I got your text. Tell me what happened in detail, no omitting anything." Cynthia sighed, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. She recounted the entire ordeal: Naomi's hysterics, Yvette's planted suspicion, the discovery of the necklace in her purse. Her voice shook as she asked, "Why would they do this to me? Is it just jealousy? Am I really that threatening to Naomi?" Christine's expression hardened with conviction. "Naomi is threatened by your share of the inheritance. She's trying to cast doubt on your character. If she can show you're dishonest or unstable, she might be able to control or diminish your claim when you turn 21. Cynthia's eyes filled with tears, but not just tears of hurt, tears of exasperation. "I've never even wanted the money for myself. All I want is to continue my mother's philanthropic work. My father knows that." She paused, voice trembling. "But does he still trust me?" Christine reached across the table and gently squeezed Cynthia's hand. "He loves you. That's different from trusting you, but love has a way of guiding people to do the right thing eventually. Plus, he's a smart man, Naomi might fool some people, but Hector knows who you are at your core. The question is, how do we prove Naomi's setting you up? Before Cynthia could respond, Jonathan Harrington walked in. He spotted them, gave a small, concerned smile, and approached. "Christine texted me last night." "I'm so sorry, Cynthia," he said, sliding into the booth beside her. "I've known you for months now, and I know you'd never stoop to stealing jewelry." A wave of relief washed over Cynthia, though she felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Thank you for believing me." I just don't know how to get out of this mess." Jonathan frowned. "What if we find evidence that Naomi orchestrated this?" Yvette might be the key. She seems terrified of Naomi. Maybe she knows more than she's letting on. Christine nodded. "I had the same thought. If we can persuade Yvette to speak the truth, it could turn things around." Yet persuading Yvette to risk her livelihood and face Naomi's wrath was no small task. Jonathan offered to help, but Cynthia was hesitant. She already felt fragile enough. Confronting Naomi or Yvette directly terrified her. Naomi was a seasoned manipulator with a cunning streak. Cynthia feared that if she made one wrong move, Naomi would twist it against her in a more vicious manner. For now, they agreed on a cautious approach. Christine would quietly probe the household staff for information and keep tabs on Naomi's next steps. Jonathan would remain supportive, offering his business connections if needed, and Cynthia, she decided she would try to maintain a semblance of normalcy, continue her volunteering, and wait for an opportunity to prove her innocence. Deep down, however, Cynthia was haunted by a nagging fear. Naomi was powerful, connected, and unscrupulous. The woman had already proven her willingness to lie and manipulate. If Naomi could orchestrate a stolen necklace fiasco so convincingly, what else might she be plotting? The unknown possibilities cast a gloomy cloud over the days leading up to Cynthia's milestone birthday. Amid the uncertainty, though, a new resilience began to awaken in Cynthia. She realized she had to rise above her own fears, if not for herself, then for her late mother's legacy and for all the children who depended on her work at the community center. The path ahead looked treacherous, but Cynthia was no shrinking violet. She would press on, holding on to the belief that truth, once uncovered, could be her greatest ally. And so, while Naomi refined her next move, Cynthia and her few loyal companions braced themselves for a battle they had no choice but to fight. Despite the cloud of suspicion around her, Cynthia tried to focus on the upcoming Winter's Grace fundraiser. She trained daily with the children for their dance performance, determined not to let personal turmoil overshadow the charitable cause. The children, blissfully unaware of adult politics, brought a sense of joy and normalcy to her life. Their laughter and excitement reminded her that hope still existed, even in the darkest of times. Meanwhile, Naomi found new ways to tighten her hold. She had a keen sense of when and where to strike, and she now aimed to discredit Cynthia on a larger scale. Naomi had found out through Hector that a journalist from a reputable magazine was writing a feature on the Robles family's philanthropic endeavors. This journalist, Marcus Bellamy, was scheduled to attend the fundraiser and interview the family. Naomi seized the opportunity. She invited Marcus to a private luncheon at the mansion a few days before the fundraiser, ostensibly to help him understand the Robles family dynamic. What he didn't know was that Naomi intended to plant seeds of suspicion against Cynthia. Throughout the luncheon, Naomi waxed lyrical about her philanthropic heart and her concern for Cynthia, who she painted as an emotional, possibly troubled young woman. She meticulously dropped hints about the incident with the missing necklace, carefully omitting mention of any proof of Cynthia's innocence. To maintain an air of fairness, Naomi would sigh dramatically and say, "I love her as my own, but I worry for her." So much pressure can do strange things to a young person. Marcus, in search of a compelling story, couldn't help taking notes. His questions to Naomi revealed a curiosity about the rumored animosity within the family. Sensing an angle, he pressed Naomi for details. Naomi feigned hesitation, as though reluctant to air the family's dirty laundry. In reality, she was thrilled that her narrative was taking shape in a journalist's notebook. After the luncheon, Naomi felt invincible. She was certain that a published piece questioning Cynthia's integrity would damage Cynthia's reputation beyond repair. At best, it would cause enough scandal to isolate Cynthia socially. At worst, it might push Hector to reconsider the terms of Cynthia's inheritance. Naomi saw this as a victory on the horizon. Yet, in the background, Christine quietly gathered information. She studied the staff's behavior, noticing that Yvette appeared increasingly uneasy. On one occasion, Christine overheard Naomi scolding Yvette for some trivial error. Naomi's words were laced with venom. "You'll do as I say, or you'll regret it." Yvette's pale face told Christine everything she needed to know. The young maid was deeply entangled in Naomi's schemes and terrified of the consequences. But how to get Yvette to talk? Christine debated confronting her directly. She toyed with the idea of offering Yvette legal protection or threatening Naomi with a lawsuit for defamation. But everything had to be carefully orchestrated. One misstep could spook Yvette and drive her deeper into Naomi's clutches. Jonathan, on the other hand, made it his mission to stay close to Cynthia. He feared that in a moment of despair, Cynthia might collapse under the weight of the false accusations. He accompanied her to rehearsals, offered moral support, and continued brainstorming ways to expose Naomi. Their shared moments, though often overshadowed by stress, took on a quiet intimacy. They discovered they could trust each other completely, an unspoken bond that was growing steadily, perhaps into something more than friendship. As the days to the fundraiser ticked by, Cynthia found an unexpected wellspring of determination. She refused to let Naomi's campaign destroy her spirit. Late at night, she practiced extra hours with the children, perfecting the dance routine. She wrote personalized thank you notes to donors, ignoring the rumors swirling around her. Her focus on kindness and community work shone like a small candle, defying the darkness that Naomi was so diligently weaving. In a household where every whisper could be a lie and every gesture might be weaponized, Cynthia's steadfast belief in goodness was both her shield and her sword. Little did she know that this unwavering spirit would soon be tested to its breaking point, and that Naomi's next move would bring the conflict to a dramatic crescendo, one that would forever alter the family's course. The Winter's Grace fundraiser was more than just a charity event. It was a spectacle of high society, complete with ice sculptures, crystal chandeliers, and a red carpet entrance for the city's elite. Held in the grand ballroom of the Greenwich Grand Hotel, every detail exuded opulence, from the live orchestra playing melodic tunes to the elegantly dressed guests swirling in conversation. Cynthia arrived early, guiding a group of excited children through the backstage area. She wore a simple but stunning midnight blue gown, her hair swept up in a graceful chignon. The children, dressed in white and silver costumes, glowed with anticipation. For them, the night was about dancing and receiving applause for their hard work. For Cynthia, it was also about reclaiming her dignity. She felt a surge of nerves, wondering whether the rumors Naomi had spread had reached the ears of potential donors. In the main hall, Naomi glided among the guests in a dazzling champagne-colored dress. Her diamond jewelry caught the light with every step she took. She greeted old acquaintances with air kisses and polite smiles, deftly weaving a tapestry of social connections around her. With practiced skill, Naomi steered conversations to highlight her philanthropic efforts and subtly cast doubt on Cynthia's capabilities. She was determined to dominate the spotlight, ensuring that any mention of Cynthia came laced with insinuation. Hector stood by the entrance, greeting prominent donors and business associates. He wore an air of forced cheerfulness. The tension in his eyes was palpable. He had yet to fully unravel the mystery of the missing necklace, and the unpleasant suspicions weighed on him. Still, he put on a brave face, determined to make this event a success for the Children's Centre and his other charitable causes. Close by, Jonathan Harrington mingled with fellow entrepreneurs, always keeping one eye on Cynthia. He admired her resilience. Even under the scrutiny of these powerful, sometimes judgmental guests, she conducted herself with grace and a genuine smile. If only the world could see the purity of her heart, all of Naomi's slander would vanish like mist in sunlight. The orchestra struck its opening notes. Guests drifted toward their seats, preparing for the evening's presentations. Eventually, Hector took the stage to deliver his welcome address, emphasizing the importance of community support. Then he introduced the children's dance, calling Cynthia to join them on stage. Cynthia took a deep breath, stepping into the spotlight with the children around her. Their performance was magical. The dance told a story of hope, of children finding warmth and joy in a cold world. Cynthia moved with an elegance that left the audience spellbound. She guided the little ones with gentle nudges and smiles, ensuring they were synchronized and confident. By the time the final note faded, the crowd erupted into applause. For a brief, shining moment, all of Cynthia's anxieties melted away. Yet, backstage, a tempest brewed. Naomi had arranged for Yvette to slip away from the hotel and return to the mansion. Her orders were clear. She wanted Yvette to retrieve something from Cynthia's room, something that would cast Cynthia in a grievous light if revealed at the fundraiser. Naomi had discovered an old journal in which Cynthia had, years ago, written about her struggles with depression after her mother's death. Naomi planned to twist those vulnerable confessions into proof of Cynthia's instability, exploiting her emotional turmoil as evidence that Cynthia was prone to deceit and theft. But Naomi's plan took an unexpected turn. Christine, who had grown suspicious of Naomi's comings and goings, happened to notice Yvette leaving the hotel in haste. Christine slipped away from the fundraiser and followed the maid, curious about her errand. When Yvette arrived at the mansion, Christine waited in the shadows, watching carefully. Through a window, she saw Yvette rummaging through Cynthia's belongings until she found the worn, leather-bound journal. Christine's heart sank. She quickly deduced Naomi's intention to humiliate Cynthia in the most personal and devastating way. Back at the fundraiser, Cynthia was greeted by enthusiastic compliments and appreciative donors. Yet Naomi smiled coldly, a cat-like triumph glimmering in her eyes. She knew that once Yvette returned with the journal, she would have all the ammunition she needed to publicly shame Cynthia. Naomi imagined unveiling a few pages under the guise of concern right in front of Marcus Bellamy, the journalist. She could already picture the headlines questioning Cynthia's mental state and reliability. As the event progressed, the tension mounted. Cynthia felt the unease in the air, but couldn't pinpoint its source. Jonathan pulled her aside, quietly praising her performance and suggesting they speak privately after the event. His voice was kind, his gaze encouraging. Cynthia nodded, a flicker of hope warming her heart. But little did she know that at any moment, Naomi planned to strike like a snake, determined to deliver the final blow that would tarnish Cynthia's reputation forever. Christine quietly followed Yvette back to the hotel, determined to intervene. If Naomi managed to reveal Cynthia's journal, the damage would be immense. Those personal confessions were never meant to be paraded in front of society's elite. Christine's mind raced. She knew that confrontation with Naomi might be risky, but letting her proceed unchallenged was not an option. However, Christine was not alone in her determination. When she re-entered the hotel's back corridor, she nearly collided with Jonathan, who had also been searching for Naomi's staff. Christine explained to him in hushed tones what she had witnessed at the mansion. Jonathan's face darkened with concern. "We have to stop her," he said firmly. "Do you have any idea how we can turn the tables?" Christine bit her lip. "We could expose Naomi's real motives by proving she orchestrated the theft of the necklace. If Yvette confesses, we'll have more than enough evidence to show Naomi's pattern of deceit." But Yvette is too scared to talk. Jonathan glanced at his watch. The final speeches of the evening were about to begin. "Maybe we can leverage the fact that Naomi is about to do something illegal, or at least ethically appalling, reading someone's private journal without consent. That's a violation of privacy. If we convince Yvette that she might face legal repercussions, she might come clean." They found Yvette in a side hallway, clutching the journal in trembling hands. She looked like a frightened rabbit cornered by wolves. Christine approached her gently. "Yvette, listen. This can't go on. You know Naomi is using you. If you help her ruin Cynthia's life, you could be held legally accountable as an accomplice. This is serious." Tears welled in Yvette's eyes. "I have no choice. She threatened to have me fired. My mother needs medical treatment, and my paycheck goes to her care," Naomi said. She trailed off, unable to finish. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Jonathan softened his voice. "I understand you're in a terrible position, but the truth is, Naomi doesn't care about you. She'll discard you the moment you're no longer useful. If you help us, we can protect you. I have resources and connections. We can ensure Naomi can't just sweep you aside." Yvette blinked through her tears, torn between fear and the longing to be free from Naomi's grasp. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, as if resigning herself to the inevitable. "I'll do it. I'll tell the truth about the necklace and the journal. But please help me find another job, somewhere far from here." Christine gave her a reassuring smile. "That's a promise." Armed with Yvette's cooperation, Christine and Jonathan formulated a quick plan. They would wait for Naomi to make her move, then catch her red-handed with the journal and present Yvette's testimony. But they needed Hector's presence, and possibly Marcus Bellamy's, so there would be reputable witnesses when Naomi's deceit came to light. As Yvette slipped the journal discreetly back into her coat, Christine whispered, "We'll be right behind you. Don't hand that journal to Naomi until we give you the signal. We want everyone to see who's really behind this." The trio parted ways, each feeling the weight of what was about to unfold. Yvette would head toward the ballroom, with Christine and Jonathan shadowing her from a safe distance. Once Naomi presented her false story to the crowd or the journalist, they would confront her. The stakes were high. Either Naomi's plan would shatter, or her cunning would outmaneuver them yet again. Cynthia, meanwhile, stood at the edge of the ballroom, blissfully unaware of the machinations happening in the corridors. She was chatting with some patrons who praised her performance. Soon, Hector would give his closing remarks, and the event would wind down. The night seemed poised to end on a note of success for the fundraiser, but for Cynthia and Naomi, the final act of this drama was just about to begin. As the Winter's Grace fundraiser neared its finale, the atmosphere in the ballroom hummed with contentment and the afterglow of charitable generosity. Hector climbed the stage for his concluding speech. He expressed gratitude to all donors, praising Cynthia's dedication and acknowledging Naomi's contributions as well, though his gaze flickered with uncertainty when he mentioned her name. In the midst of Hector's speech, Naomi positioned herself near Marcus Bellamy, the journalist, and signaled Yvette with a subtle nod. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Without hesitation, Yvette approached Naomi with the leather-bound journal tucked under her arm. Naomi's eyes shone with triumphant malice as she accepted it. Marcus, sensing an unfolding drama, leaned closer. "What's that?" he asked, curiosity laced with intrigue. Naomi feigned reluctance, clutching the journal as though it were a burning coal. "It's something of Cynthia's," she said softly, "a personal diary. I've just learned that it might contain some troubling entries." "I'm torn, Mr. Bellamy. On one hand, I want to respect her privacy. On the other, I feel it's my duty to ensure the truth comes out, especially since there are rumors about a stolen necklace." Her voice trembled artfully, as if she truly were a mother figure worried about a troubled child. Marcus raised his eyebrows, hooking onto her every word. Nearby guests also began to perk up, sensing the shift in energy. In that tense moment, Jonathan and Christine stepped forward, flanking Naomi. Christine's voice cut through the chatter, calm but firm. "Naomi, what exactly are you planning to reveal about Cynthia?" Naomi, caught off guard, turned to face them. She glared at Yvette, who stood a few feet away, her posture stiff and anxious. "I'm only sharing the truth," Naomi said in a hollowly righteous tone. "I have reason to believe Cynthia's mental state is affecting her moral judgment." "This journal, that journal was stolen from Cynthia's room," Jonathan interrupted, his tone sharper than usual. "You're invading her privacy and using her personal confessions against her. Isn't that precisely the sort of behavior you warned the staff never to engage in?" The surrounding crowd, including Hector and Marcus Bellamy, now shifted their attention fully to this confrontation. Heads turned, whispers swirled. Naomi tried to maintain composure. "I'm only doing what any concerned stepmother would do," she insisted, pressing a hand dramatically over her heart. "I discovered this journal by accident. Yvette found it tucked in Cynthia's purse. She thought it was relevant to the stolen necklace situation. That was the cue." Christine nodded to Yvette, who stepped forward, trembling but resolute. The maid cleared her throat. I need to speak the truth." Her voice was so soft that Christine offered her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Yvette's eyes flicked nervously around the room. "Miss Naomi forced me to plant the family necklace in Miss Cynthia's purse." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers, including Hector, whose face drained of color. Cynthia, who had been near the edge of the crowd, felt her world tilt. Jonathan gently guided her closer, giving her a supportive arm to cling to. "That's not all," Yvette continued, tears building. "Mistress Naomi also ordered me to bring Cynthia's personal journal here tonight. She planned to show it to you, Mr. Bellamy, and claim that Miss Cynthia's entries proved she was unstable or deceitful." Yvette paused, glancing at Naomi, who looked livid. "But it's not true. Miss Cynthia is innocent. She never stole anything." Naomi's face contorted in rage. "This is a ridiculous lie," she spat, turning to Hector. "You can't possibly believe this, darling. She's just a disgruntled maid. She must be in league with Cynthia to embarrass me." But Naomi's protests fell on deaf ears. Hector's gaze, heavy with shock and dawning realization, never left his wife. "Naomi," he said quietly, "tell me this isn't true. Tell me you haven't been orchestrating all this from the start." Naomi's mouth opened and closed, struggling for an explanation, but the silent condemnation from everyone around her spoke volumes. Marcus Bellamy, always the journalist, took a step forward. "Is there any proof to corroborate Yvette's statement?" Christine pulled out her phone. "I recorded a conversation with Yvette earlier." She pressed play, and the muffled audio revealed the maid admitting to planting the necklace at Naomi's request and retrieving the journal under Naomi's orders. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Hector looked stunned, while Cynthia felt an overwhelming mix of vindication, relief, and heartbreak. Her stepmother, the woman who was supposed to be a maternal figure, had sought to destroy her. Naomi, seeing her carefully built facade crumble, let desperation take over. Her next move would push the evening's drama to a new level of intensity, one that no one Not even Cynthia saw coming. Naomi's rage finally boiled over. With all eyes upon her and her schemes laid bare, she snapped. Like a coiled viper, she spun toward Cynthia, eyes brimming with malevolence. "You ungrateful little wretch," she hissed. "I gave you everything, and you dare to turn everyone against me?" Cynthia stood rooted to the spot, tears welling in her eyes. She wanted to speak, but her voice remained trapped in her throat. The stinging realization that Naomi had never cared for her, never wanted to be a true mother figure, seared her heart. Naomi lifted her hand, and before Cynthia could react, she struck her across the face with a sharp, resounding slap. The slap might as well have been thunder, cracking the tense silence in the ballroom. Cynthia stumbled backward, pressing a shaking hand to her burning cheek, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Gasps and cries rang out among the onlookers. Christine froze in horror, Jonathan's fists clenched in anger. But it was Hector who lunged forward, his face contorted with both fury and protective instinct. He grabbed Naomi's wrist, preventing a second blow that seemed moments away from landing. The strength and speed of Hector's reaction revealed the paternal love he held for Cynthia. "How dare you!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent room. "You will never lay a hand on my daughter again." Naomi tried to yank her wrist free, but Hector's grip was iron. In that instant, the polished, charming facade Naomi had presented to the world was shattered. Her eyes glistened with tears of defeat and rage, scanning the crowd of horrified faces. Everyone witnessed the truth. She was the manipulator, the aggressor, the one who had undermined the family's unity for her own gain. Security personnel and event staff surged forward, uncertain of what to do next, but ready to intervene if more violence ensued. Marcus Bellamy hurriedly jotted notes and snapped a photo with his phone. He knew he was witnessing a scandal that would shock the community. Christine rushed to Cynthia's side, enveloping her in a comforting embrace. Jonathan was also there, softly touching Cynthia's shoulder, his concern evident. Still gripping Naomi's wrist, Hector glared at his wife. "I want you out of here," he said, his voice cold with conviction. "Do you understand? Out of this hotel, out of my home. We will discuss formalities later, but for now, leave. You've disgraced this family and yourself." Naomi, tears streaking her face, realized she had lost. She tore her arm free from Hector's grasp. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the ballroom, her high heels echoing on the marble floor like a funeral march. A wave of hushed whispers followed in her wake. The scene she left behind was one of disbelief and uneasy relief. Cynthia trembled, her cheek throbbing, but the pain was overshadowed by a dizzying surge of emotional release. She was free from the looming threats and manipulations. Tears slipped down her face, mingling with a weak, relieved smile. Christine and Jonathan guided her off to a quieter corner, where a hotel staff member offered her ice for her cheek. Hector stepped to the microphone again, obviously shaken. He cleared his throat, struggling to regain composure. "I apologize," he said, addressing the stunned audience. "It appears we've had a personal crisis. Please, let's continue the evening's mission to support these children. We'll deal with this family matter privately." His voice wavered, but the audience offered a respectful round of applause, sympathetic to the explosive situation. But even as the official portion of the fundraiser resumed, no one could ignore what had just happened. Conversations buzzed about Naomi's downfall, about the newly revealed fact that she had orchestrated a vile plan against her stepdaughter. And in one electrifying moment, the tension that had built up for months had erupted only to subside into a strange, uncertain calm. For Cynthia, the sting on her cheek paled in comparison to the betrayal that battered her heart. Yet she also felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her father had stood up for her at last, unveiling Naomi's true colors to everyone present. Jonathan and Christine had orchestrated a bold plan to expose Naomi's lies, and Yvette had found the courage to speak the truth. That night marked the end of an era, the era in which Cynthia was the helpless Cinderella, locked away and despised by a cruel mistress. She had her father's love and protection now, and she had allies who would stand by her in the darkest storms. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time she felt the shackles of Naomi's tyranny fall away. The next chapter of her life would be hers to claim, with the promise of healing and hope guiding her forward. The days after the fundraiser were a whirlwind of media frenzy. Headlines blazed with Naomi's public humiliation, labeling her the architect of a cruel plot. Photos and eyewitness accounts of the slap spread quickly, fueling the city's chatter. Hector issued a terse statement, urging respect for his family's privacy. Yet reporters swarmed the mansion gates, shouting questions whenever Cynthia ventured outside. Though cleared of wrongdoing, she found the sudden spotlight overwhelming. She clung to the children's drawings and letters of support, reminders of her purpose beyond scandal. Inside the mansion, relief mixed with lingering shock. Without Naomi's controlling presence, the household staff breathed more easily. Christine offered legal guidance to Hector, and Jonathan stood by Cynthia's side, a silent pillar of comfort. Their presence helped Cynthia cope with the sudden media onslaught. Meanwhile, Naomi retreated to a penthouse downtown, already contesting her eventual divorce settlement. She tried planting new rumors, but few believed her. Yvette, under Christine's protection, found safer employment. Finally free, she refused all attempts to coerce her into silence. Despite the chaos, a fragile sense of peace emerged. Cynthia reclaimed her childhood room, intent on honoring her mother's memory through renewed volunteer work and daily acts of kindness. Though the betrayal still stung, she felt hopeful for the first time in years. The mansion's dark shadows receded little by little, replaced by the promise of fresh starts and honest connections. A few days after the scandal, Hector asked Cynthia to join him in the garden once, her childhood retreat with her mother. Fresh lilies bloomed along the gazebo, a quiet nod to her late mother's favorite flower. Looking weary but resolute, Hector confessed, "I'm sorry for failing you. I was blind, wanting a complete family so badly that I ignored the signs. Naomi betrayed us both." Cynthia gripped his hand. "I understand, Dad. We can't change the past, but we can move forward." They strolled, recalling happier times, her mother's warm smiles, playful afternoons chasing butterflies. Each memory reminded them of the love they once shared as a family. Hector then revealed he was filing for divorce and revising Cynthia's inheritance, so she'd have complete control once she turned 21. Touched, Cynthia accepted with a tremulous smile. "I'll use it wisely in Mom's memory." They embraced, letting forgiveness outweigh bitterness. Leaving the gazebo, father and daughter stepped into the mansion side by side, hearts lighter, certain that honesty and unity would guide the family's future. Cynthia's 21st birthday dawned with warm sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows. Instead of a grand affair, she chose a simple, heartfelt gathering in the mansion's main hall, decorated in soft pastels, fresh flowers, and a few cherished photos of her late mother. Friends and staff arrived early, eager to celebrate a day that felt more like a homecoming than a party. The children from the community center performed a short dance, delighting everyone with their energy. Christine helped coordinate the event, ensuring every detail glowed with sincerity. Even Yvette quietly joined, smiling shyly at Cynthia. When Jonathan presented a bouquet of lavender roses matching Cynthia's dress, her cheeks warmed with an unspoken tenderness. Hector, looking rested after their recent trials, offered a moving toast, praising his daughter's resilience. Tearfully, Cynthia cut a small, elegant cake, wishing for hope and peace in the days ahead. As she danced with Jonathan in the softly lit hall, Cynthia felt the weight of old burdens fade. No longer trapped by Naomi's manipulations, she embraced a future guided by genuine bonds and compassion. The mansion that once echoed with discord now filled with laughter and renewed promise, marking the dawn of a new, happier chapter in Cynthia's life. A month after Cynthia's birthday celebration, the Robles mansion settled into a tranquil new rhythm. The once constant press attention had faded, allowing Cynthia and Hector to resume more regular routines. Yvette's replacement, a cheerful housekeeper named Rosa, filled the halls with a sense of optimism. Even the household staff, who had weathered Naomi's storm, seemed lighter in spirit, relieved to be free of daily manipulations. Naomi, now barred from the mansion, had escalated her legal demands, attempting to claim a generous share of Hector's wealth. She threatened to release incriminating, though fabricated information to tabloids if she did not receive a substantial settlement. Hector's lawyers, however, were well prepared. They possessed a trove of evidence of Naomi's deceit, including recorded testimony from Yvette. The truth had a powerful way of repelling false allegations. Moreover, Christine Delgado took an active role behind the scenes. Advising Hector's legal team, she carefully compiled timelines of Naomi's misconduct, pairing them with text messages, audio recordings, and testimony from staff. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Naomi's case. In the end, Hector's lawyers negotiated a settlement that fell far below Naomi's initial demands. While she received a modest sum to expedite her departure, it wasn't enough to sustain her luxurious tastes indefinitely. During this period, Cynthia spent her time and resources remodeling part of the mansion into a creative art space for children. The new Elaine wing, named after Cynthia's mother, included rooms for dance lessons, art workshops, and small concerts. Generous donations poured in from sponsors who admired Cynthia's resilience and genuine philanthropic spirit. She also extended partnerships to other community organizations, forging a network of support for underprivileged youth. Word of Cynthia's dedication and warmth spread beyond the city limits. Invitations arrived for her to speak at charity luncheons and youth events. She approached each opportunity with humility, focusing on the children's needs rather than her own dramatic backstory. Yet many attendees were curious about her personal journey, seeing in her a modern-day Cinderella who had overcome adversity without losing her compassionate nature. Meanwhile, Jonathan Harrington assumed a quieter, more intimate role in Cynthia's life. He proved indispensable in handling the expansion of her projects, connecting her with philanthropic circles eager to invest in community building. In the evenings, after long days of planning and budgeting, Jonathan and Cynthia would stroll through the garden, discussing not just business, but also sharing hopes for the future. Their relationship blossomed into a tender romance, one nurtured by mutual respect and a shared vision of helping others. On a crisp autumn morning, they stood together at the threshold of the Elaine wing, preparing for the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. Hector was inside, greeting guests and donors, while Christine helped coordinate last-minute details. Cynthia held the large, ceremonial scissors, her hand brushing lightly against Jonathan's. In the hush before the festivities, he smiled at her, eyes brimming with admiration. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said. Cynthia felt her heart swell with gratitude for her father's love, for Christine's unwavering friendship, for Jonathan's gentleness, and for the simple fact that she had found her voice amidst the chaos. With a confident snip, she cut the ribbon, signaling the start of a new era. Applause erupted, and children rushed in, eager to explore the bright, art-filled space that would soon hold their laughter and creativity. And in that moment, the shadows of Naomi's treachery felt like a distant memory. Cynthia realized she had claimed her story, forging a life guided by compassion and resilience. No longer was she the timid Cinderella waiting for rescue. She had rescued herself by choosing truth, by trusting her allies, and by never letting bitterness eclipse her generous heart. The future, however uncertain, now seemed filled with brilliant possibilities waiting to be embraced. Thank you for journeying with us through the twists and turns of Cynthia's modern Cinderella story. In a whirlwind of betrayal, heartbreak, and final redemption, she emerged not just a survivor, but a champion for truth and kindness. We witnessed how one determined spirit, supported by loyal friends and family, can stand strong against the most cunning manipulations. And in the end, good prevailed not through magic wands or fairy godmothers, but through courage, integrity, and steadfast love.
What happens when the perfect fairy tale shatters in the most public way imaginable? We see the lives of the ultra-rich as a fantasy. Glittering galas, endless wealth, a love story for the ages. Julian Croft, the tech billionaire, and his radiant pregnant wife, Isabella, were the world's golden couple. But on a cold October night, under the crystal chandeliers of the Savoy Hotel in London, in front of hundreds of cameras, that fantasy became a nightmare. One moment a tender touch, the next the sickening crack of a slap that echoed around the globe. This isn't a story about a simple argument. This is a story about how a single, brutal act can expose a universe of secrets, lies, and a conspiracy so deep it could tear an empire apart. What could make a man who has everything risk it all with one swing of his hand? The answer is far more shocking than you could ever imagine. The air in the grand ballroom of the Savoy was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, the glittering apex of London's philanthropic calendar. And at the heart of it all, holding court without a throne, were Julian and Isabella Croft. Julian Croft was a man sculpted from ambition and success. At 35, his company, Nexus Dynamics, had revolutionized renewable energy, making him not just a billionaire, but a visionary. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, a jawline that seemed carved from granite, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and secure billion-pound deals. Tonight, he was immaculate in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. Beside him, a perfect counterpart was his wife, Isabella. She was beauty and grace, personified a former art curator, whose quiet intelligence was often overshadowed by her stunning looks. Tonight, she wore a flowing emerald gown of silk chiffon that elegantly draped over her 5-month pregnancy. The gentle swell of her belly was a public declaration of their shared future, the next chapter in their celebrated love story. Her dark hair was swept up, showcasing a cascade of diamond earrings, a recent gift from Julian. To the outside world, they were flawless. He the titan of industry, she his elegant, adored muse. The cameras adored them. The gossip columnists revered them. Their life was a curated masterpiece of polo matches, yachting in Monaco, and romantic getaways that filled the pages of lifestyle magazines. But a masterpiece can have cracks invisible to the naked eye. As the evening wore on, a subtle tension began to coil around their table. Julian's smile, usually so effortless, seemed bolted in place. His hand, when he placed it on Isabella's back, was less a caress and more an act of possession. His fingers were just a little too tight. "Are you all right, darling?" Isabella murmured, her voice a soft melody against the din of the orchestra. She placed her hand over his. It was cold. Julian's eyes didn't meet hers. They were scanning the room, flitting from face to face with a paranoid intensity. "I'm fine." He clipped his jaw tight, just enjoying the evening. But he wasn't. For the past 2 weeks, a poison had been seeping into his mind, drop by insidious drop. It had started with an anonymous email, then a misdelivered private investigator's report to his office, filled with grainy photos of Isabella having lunch with a male friend, an old university colleague. Benign, yet the accompanying text was venomous. Does she look like a woman carrying your child, or someone hiding a secret? The architect of this poison was a man named Damien Thorne, a ruthless business rival Julian had bested in a hostile takeover 2 years prior. Thorne had been publicly humiliated and financially wounded. He had vowed revenge, but Julian, arrogant in his success, had dismissed the threat. He never imagined the revenge would be so intimate, so personally destructive. Thorne had spent a year meticulously planting seeds of doubt, using proxies and anonymous channels to feed Julian's deepest insecurity, that he wasn't worthy of a love as pure as Isabella's seemed to be. Tonight, the poison was reaching its peak. Damien Thorne was here at a table across the ballroom, watching with a predator's patience. A few minutes earlier, he had approached Julian at the bar, a condolent look on his face. "Julian, my friend." Thorne had said, his voice slick with false sympathy. "I hope whatever is troubling you and Isabella passes. A beautiful family like yours, it would be a tragedy to see it broken by misunderstandings." He let the word hang in the air, a veiled threat wrapped in concern. Now back at his table, Julian watched as Isabella laughed at something a guest said. It was a beautiful sound, but in his corrupted mind, it sounded like a betrayal. The PI report had mentioned her easy laughter with her friend. Was she laughing at him? Was this whole perfect life a charade? The final speaker of the night, the Foundation's director, took to the stage. He began to speak about the importance of family, of protecting the innocent, of building a safe future for children. Each word was a hammer blow to Julian's fractured psyche. And now the director announced, "We'd like to honor a couple who have been our most generous benefactors, a true example of love and partnership. Please join me in a round of applause for Mr. Julian and Mrs. Isabella Croft." A spotlight flooded their table. The room erupted in applause. This was the moment. They were supposed to stand, wave, and embody the fairy tale. Isabella turned to Julian, her face alight with a genuine, proud smile. The love in her eyes was unmistakable, a beacon in the storm of his paranoia. "Julian, they're honoring us. Isn't it wonderful?" She reached for his hand. In that moment, her pure, unsuspecting joy was the final trigger. To his sickened mind, it was the ultimate act of deception. The gall of her to look so innocent, while in his mind, she was carrying another man's child and making a fool of him in front of the world that worshipped him. He stood up. Isabella started to rise with him, her smile still radiant. "Don't touch me," he snarled, his voice a low, terrifying growl that only she could hear. Her smile faltered. Confusion clouded her beautiful features. "Julian." "What's wrong?" she whispered, her hand still outstretched. He looked from her hand to her face, to the gentle curve of her stomach. The future he had so desperately wanted, now a symbol of his humiliation. The applause continued, a deafening soundtrack to his private hell. Damien Thorne was watching, a faint, triumphant smirk on his lips. It was all too much. The pressure, the paranoia, the public adoration that now felt like mockery. In one swift, horrific motion, Julian's carefully constructed world imploded. He drew his hand back and slapped her. The sound was sharp, ugly, and absolute. It cut through the applause like a guillotine. A collective gasp, a tidal wave of shock swept across the grand ballroom. The orchestra faltered, a violin screeching into silence. Every phone, every camera, every eye was locked on them. Isabella stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek, not in pain tan tun, but in sheer, unadulterated shock. The stinging on her skin was nothing compared to the shattering of her heart. Tears welled instantly, not of sadness, but of disbelief. The man she loved, the father of her child, had just struck her in front of the entire world. For a frozen second, there was only the tableau. The billionaire, his hand still half raised, his face a mask of rage and instant regret. The beautiful pregnant wife, her world destroyed. And the silent, watching crowd. Then the silence broke, and the crowd turned against him instantly. The silence that followed the slap lasted only 3 seconds, but within that void, an entire Emma began to crumble. It was a silence filled with the frantic clicking of camera shutters and the horrified, indrawn breaths of hundreds of people. Then came the roar. It wasn't a cheer. It was a wave of collective revulsion. The first voice to cut through was a woman's sharp cry from a nearby table, "You monster!" Suddenly, the spell was broken. The room, once a sea of polite smiles and quiet murmurs, erupted into a cacophony of outrage. Phones, which moments before were discreetly tucked away, were now held aloft, their small red recording lights, blinking like 100 angry eyes. The live stream of the gala, meant to capture philanthropy in action, was now broadcasting a billionaire's downfall in high definition. Julian stood frozen, the tingling in his palm, a horrifying echo of his action. The red haze of his rage evaporated as quickly as it had descended, replaced by a chilling, gut-wrenching clarity. What had he done? He looked at Isabella. Truly looked at her for the first time in weeks, past the veil of his suspicion. He saw not a deceiver, but the woman he had vowed to protect. Her eyes wide with a pain so deep it seemed to suck the air from his own lungs. Her hand was still on her cheek, her body trembling. Before he could utter a word, a figure moved with purpose from the table next to theirs. It was Beatrice Alistair, a formidable woman in her late 60s, with silver hair styled in an elegant chignon, and a reputation for philanthropy matched only by her sharp tongue. She was old money, a matriarch of London society, who feared no one, least of all a new money tech mogul having a breakdown. Ignoring Julian completely as if he were a piece of furniture, Mrs. Alistair wrapped a steadying arm around Isabella's shoulders. "Come, my dear," she said, her voice firm but kind, a rock in the swirling chaos. "You will not stand here for one more second." Isabella, seemingly in a trance, allowed herself to be guided away. As she passed Julian, she didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of dignity. That lack of acknowledgement was more cutting than any scream or accusation could have ever been. He had ceased to exist for her. Julian reached out a desperate, reflexive gesture. "Isa, wait." His words were swallowed by the rising tide of condemnation. "Shame on you," another guest shouted. In front of everyone, a man yelled. The security detail, initially paralyzed by the profile of the individuals involved, now began to move, forming a clumsy barrier around Julian, as reporters freed from the constraints of polite society surged forward. "Croft, why did you hit your wife?" Is there trouble in the marriage? Is the baby okay? The questions were like shrapnel. He staggered back, his mind unable to process the cacophony. His eyes darted across the room and locked with Damien Thorne's. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of performative, grave concern. Thorne even shook his head slightly as if to say, "What a tragedy." He was already playing his next move, distancing himself, becoming a concerned bystander to the demolition he had engineered. Julian's security team, led by a stoic man named Marcus, finally managed to hustle him towards a service exit. The walk was a gauntlet of pure hatred. People who had shaken his hand an hour ago now stared at him with contempt. They didn't step aside. They forced his security to carve a path through their disgust. As he was bundled into the dark corridor behind the kitchens, the last thing he heard from the ballroom was Mrs. Alistair's voice ringing with authority, directed at the gawking crowd. "Give the woman some dignity. All of you put your phones away this instant." In a quiet private suite on the hotel's 5th floor, secured by Mrs. Alistair's influence, Isabella sat on the edge of a silk-covered bed. A hotel doctor had just finished checking her vitals, reassuring her that physically both she and the baby were unharmed. The red mark on her cheek was already beginning to fade. The invisible wounds, however, were catastrophic. Mrs. Alistair dismissed the doctor with a grateful nod and sat beside her, handing her a glass of water. "Drink this, child." Isabella's hands were shaking too much to hold the glass. Mrs. Alistair held it to her lips for her. For a long time, Isabella said nothing. She just stared at the intricate pattern on the Persian rug, her mind a whiteout of shock. The public humiliation was a burning fire, but beneath it was the icy core of betrayal. The man who had recited poetry to her under the stars in Tuscany, the man who had cried with joy when she told him she was pregnant, the man whose child was moving inside her at this very moment, that man had looked at her with pure hatred and struck her. It wasn't him, she finally whispered the words, "horse." Mrs. Alistair raised a skeptical eyebrow. "My dear, I saw it with my own eyes. The whole world saw it." No, Isabella insisted, a flicker of her old strength returning. She looked up, her gaze clear and intense, despite the tears. "I mean that man in the ballroom was not my husband, not the man I married. Something is wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong." She had seen glimpses of it for weeks. The paranoia, the sleepless nights, the sudden sharp questions about her past. He had become distant suspicious, a ghost haunting their perfect home. She had tried to talk to him, but he had pushed her away, retreating further into a fortress of dark thoughts. She had assumed it was the pressure of a new acquisition his company was making. She had never in her wildest nightmares imagined this. "He's been manipulated," Isabella said, the conviction growing in her voice. "Someone has been poisoning him against me." Her mind, sharp and analytical, from her years as a curator, piecing together the history of art, began to work. She thought of the strange stunts, the veiled comments. And then a name surfaced in her memory. Damien Thorne. She remembered Julian mentioning his strangely solicitous behavior recently. She remembered the look on Thorne's face at a board meeting she'd attended months ago, a look of cold, calculating hatred directed at Julian. Downstairs, Julian was finally bundled into the back of his Rolls-Royce Phantom. The car was immediately swarmed by paparazzi who had been alerted. The flashbulbs were relentless, a blinding, predatory storm. Inside the silent, leather-clad cocoon of the car, Julian slumped against the seathead in his hands. His phone was vibrating incessantly, a frantic text from his head of PR viral. Croft slap trending #1 worldwide. Stock futures in freefall. Call me now. He ignored it. All he could see was Isabella's face, the shock, the hurt, the utter destruction of her trust in him. The poison that Damien Thorne had poured into his ear now seemed like a pathetic, flimsy excuse for an act of unforgivable brutality. He hadn't been a manipulated man. He had been a weak one. He had allowed his own insecurities to be weaponized against the person he loved most. He had flown to the sun and in a moment of mad pride had melted his own wings. But he hadn't just fallen. He had dragged his pregnant wife and his unborn child down into the fire with him. The crowd had turned against him instantly, but the most damning judgment had been in Isabella's eyes, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that winning back the world's approval would be nothing compared to the impossible task of winning back hers. The 24 hours that followed the slap were not a news cycle. They were a global maelstrom. By dawn, Julian Croft was no longer a visionary billionaire. He was a meme, a villain, a hashtag. His face, contorted in rage, was juxtaposed against Isabella's look of stunned betrayal on every major news network, from CNN to the BBC. The headline in The Sun was simple and brutal. The Beast and the Beauty. Nexus Dynamics. The Empire. Julian had built from nothing was an empire of glass, and the world was now throwing stones. By the time the London Stock Exchange opened at 8 a.m., its stock had entered a free fall so catastrophic it triggered automatic trading halts. Investors weren't just nervous, they were morally repulsed. The company's board of directors, a collection of powerful figures who had once idolized Julian, convened an emergency meeting without him. The agenda had only one item, Clause 7 of his contract, the morality clause. Holed up in his sterile minimalist penthouse overlooking the Thames, Julian was a king in a kingdom of one. He hadn't slept. He had watched the news until the repetition of his own monstrous image made him physically sick. He had showered 3 times trying to scrub the phantom feeling of the slap from his skin. Marcus, his head of security, stood by the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear, taking in a relentless stream of bad news. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice flat, devoid of its usual deference. "The board has voted. They're invoking the morality clause. They've requested your immediate and indefinite leave of absence. The press release is scheduled for noon." Julian didn't react. He was staring at a framed photo on his desk. It was of him and Isabella in Santorini, taken a year ago. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the setting sun catching the gold in her hair. He had been so sure then of his own goodness reflected in her eyes. "And Mrs. Croft?" Julian asked, his voice a rasp. "She remains at the Savoy, sir, in the royal suite. Mrs. Alistair has arranged for her own private security. My calls to her team have been rebuffed. They have made it clear that any attempt by you to approach or contact her will be met with a restraining order." Each word was a nail in his coffin. He was being surgically excised from his own life. His personal phone buzzed. It was his mother, a formidable woman calling from their family estate in the Cotswolds. He answered. "Julian," she began, her voice devoid of warmth. "I have just seen your father, a man who has never shown a moment of weakness in his 70 years. And he was weeping, not with anger, but with shame. Whatever you have become, it is not the son we raised." The line went dead. The weight of it all finally broke him. He swept his arm across his desk, sending the photo his laptop. everything crashing to the floor. He sank into his chair, a strangled sob escaping his lips. This was the true consequence, not the money, not the company, but the severing of every bond of love and respect he had ever known. In the quiet luxury of the royal suite, Isabella was mounting a different kind of response. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She was not a victim to be pitied. She was a woman who had been wronged, and she needed to understand why. With the formidable Beatrice Alistair by her side, orchestrating a protective shield around her, Isabella began to piece together the puzzle. "Damien Thorne," Isabella said again, more certain this time. "He has to be behind this. Julian would never—" She trailed off. He had. But he had been pushed. Beatrice, using her vast network, made a few discreet calls. Within hours, a picture began to emerge, a whisper from a disgruntled former employee of Thorne's. A tip from a financial journalist who had been tracking Thorne's unusual short positions against Nexus Dynamics stock, placed a week before the gala. He wasn't just planning for a downfall, he was betting on it. The most crucial piece of information came from a junior IT technician at Nexus Dynamics, a young woman whom Isabella had once mentored when she visited the office. Terrified of losing her job, but fiercely loyal to Isabella, the technician called a private number Beatrice had provided. "Mrs. Croft," she whispered, "there's something you need to know. For the last month, Mr. Croft's private server has been compromised. A series of encrypted files were uploaded from an external source. They were designed to look like they came from a private investigator's office in another country. I saw the logs. They were untraceable, ghost-like. But the source IP, just for a millisecond before it was masked, pinged back to a holding company. A company owned by Thorne Industries." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What was in the files?" The technician hesitated. "I only saw a file name before the system locked me out. It was Project Nightingale." Project Nightingale. It meant nothing to her. But it was a thread, and she pulled on it. Meanwhile, she knew the world was watching, waiting for her to speak. Her silence was being interpreted as weakness, the silent suffering of a battered wife. She needed to reclaim her own story. She turned to Beatrice. "I won't be a victim in his story, or in Damien Thorne's. I need to speak, not to a tabloid, but to someone serious. Someone who deals in facts, not sensationalism." Beatrice nodded, already scrolling through her contacts. "I know just the person. Clara Vance. Her interviews are legendary. She's tough, fair, and she can't be bought." Across London, in his opulent Mayfair office, Damien Thorne was celebrating. He poured 2 glasses of vintage Macallan whiskey and handed one to a man sitting in the shadows. "To Project Nightingale." Damien toasted, his eyes glittering with triumph. "More successful than I ever could have imagined. He didn't just crumble. He detonated." The man in the shadows, a disgraced geneticist named Dr. Aris Thorne. Damien's distant, debt-ridden cousin took a nervous sip. The files were convincing then. The fabricated DNA report, convincing. Damien laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Julian has one great weakness, Aris. Pride. All I had to do was suggest that his perfect wife, his perfect life was a lie, that the child he so desperately wanted wasn't his. I gave him a file showing a 99% probability that the fetus was related to Isabella's old university friend. Your work was very persuasive. Dr. Thorne shifted uncomfortably. It was falsified data, Damien. A complete fabrication. If anyone ever investigates, who will investigate? Damien scoffed. Julian is a pariah. Isabella is a broken woman. By the time the dust settles, I will have absorbed the remnants of Nexus dynamics, and he will have nothing. He took my company, so I took his life. An eye for an eye. He stared out the window at the gleaming towers of the city. He hadn't just won a business deal, he had authored a Greek tragedy. And he, the villain, was the only one left standing to enjoy the view. He was sure of it. He had accounted for Julian's pride and Isabella's love. He had not, however, accounted for her strength. Clara Vance was a journalist who moved with the quiet lethality of a panther. She didn't chase stories. Stories came to her drawn by her reputation for unearthing the truth with surgical precision. When she received the call from Beatrice Allister, she cancelled a scheduled interview with a cabinet minister. This was the real story. The interview was not set in a sterile television studio. At Isabella's request, it took place in the library of Mrs. Allister's Belgravia townhouse. The room was filled with old books and the quiet dignity of history, a deliberate choice to contrast with the garish modern chaos of the scandal. Isabella wore a simple cream cashmere dress. She was composed, her voice steady. There were no theatrics, no crocodile tears. There was only a woman determined to set the record straight. Clara began her questions gentle but probing. Isabella, the world saw an act of violence. What do you want the world to know now? Isabella looked directly into the camera. I want them to know that what they saw was not an act of domestic abuse in the way they understand it. It was the final tragic symptom of a sophisticated and cruel psychological attack against my husband, and by extension against me and our unborn child. The directness of the statement caught Clara off guard. Are you saying Julian Croft is the victim here? Julian is responsible for his actions, Isabella stated, her voice firm. He raised his hand to me, and that is something we will have to live with forever. It is a wound that may never heal. But he was not the sole architect of that moment. He was a puppet, and his strings were being pulled by a man named Damien Thorne. Over the next hour, Isabella, with Clara's expert guidance, laid out the facts. She spoke of Project Nightingale. She mentioned the compromised server, the tip from the loyal IT technician. She didn't have all the pieces, but she had enough to paint a damning picture of corporate espionage bleeding into personal warfare. But then came the moment that would change everything. There's one more thing, Isabella said, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The foundation of this attack, I believe, was a lie about my baby. A lie designed to make my husband believe this child was not his. Clara leaned forward. And is it? Isabella looked into the camera again, her eyes unwavering. When Julian and I decided to have a child, we faced some difficulties. We used IVF to conceive. It was a private, deeply personal journey for us. She took a breath. As part of that process, our DNA, our genetic markers are all on file at the most reputable fertility clinic in the country, the Lister Hospital. They are irrefutable. She slid a sealed envelope across the table to Clara. That is a certified copy of the prenatal genetic report conducted 3 days ago. It confirms with 100% certainty that Julian Croft is the father of my child. The lie, whatever form it took, was a fabrication, and I am willing to have any independent doctor in the world verify it. This was the bombshell, not just a denial, but a scientifically proven refutation of the unspoken rumor that now hung over the scandal. The interview aired that evening. It didn't just change the narrative. It torched it. The public, so quick to condemn, was now faced with a far more complex and sinister story. The hashtag #HatCroftSlap was slowly being replaced by #Project Nightingale and #Damien Thorn. In his penthouse, Julian watched the interview transfixed. He saw Isabella not broken and weeping, but strong, intelligent, and fiercely protective of their child, of his child. He heard about the IVF, a secret they had kept so close, now laid bare to defend him. He heard about the compromised server, the fabricated lie about paternity. The paranoia that had encased him like a shroud was ripped away, and the truth was blinding. He wasn't a righteous man betrayed. He was a fool, a prized champion fool who had performed his trick for the whole world to see. He thought back to every conversation with Damien, every friendly warning, every piece of evidence. It was all so clear now. The pieces clicked into place with sickening precision. The name Project Nightingale echoed in his mind. It was a name from his past. Years ago, in his first major business venture, he had outmaneuvered Damien Thorn to acquire a small but brilliant biotech firm. The firm's signature research project, a revolutionary gene sequencing technique, was codenamed Nightingale. Thorn had never forgiven him for it. This wasn't just revenge. It was poetry. Thorn had used the ghost of their first battle to win the last one. A fire Julian hadn't felt in years ignited in his gut. It wasn't the blind rage from the gala. It was a cold, focused fury. He had been played, his wife had been endangered, and his child had been used as a weapon. He picked up his phone and called the one man he knew was still loyal, the one man who operated in the shadows better than anyone. Marcus. Marcus Julian said, his voice deadly calm. "Cancel my leave of absence. We're going to work. I want you to find a man, a geneticist named Dr. Eris Thorn. Find out everything about him, his debts, his vices, his fears. And I want you to arrange a meeting for me with Damien Thorn. Not in an office. Somewhere he can't escape." Damien Thorn watched the interview from his own home, the Macallan glass frozen halfway to his lips. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. Isabella was supposed to disappear, a tragic footnote. She wasn't supposed to fight back with facts and evidence. His phone rang. It was his cousin Aris, his voice trembling with panic. "They know Damien. They're talking about a fabrication, the Lister Hospital. Their records are ironclad. We're ruined." "Calm down, you fool," Damien hissed, though his own heart was hammering against his ribs. "She has no proof connecting us to anything. It's her word against a ghost on the internet. Hold your nerve." But he knew it was too late. Isabella hadn't just cleared her name. She had given the world a new villain. And as the interview concluded with Clara Vance looking gravely at the camera and saying, "The question now is not what happened at the gala, but how far Damien Thorn was willing to go," he felt the first real tremor of fear. He had built a perfect trap for Julian Croft. He had just never considered that the bait might be the one to tear it all apart. Julian Croft had always understood that true power wasn't about shouting. It was about controlling the environment. For his confrontation with Damien Thorn, he chose the sky. The London Eye on a grey, drizzly weekday afternoon was nearly deserted. Marcus had booked an entire pod citing a private corporate event. As the colossal wheel began its slow, silent ascent, the sprawling panorama of London unfolded below, a city that had witnessed both Julian's meteoric rise and his spectacular fall. Damien Thorne stepped into the pod just as the doors were closing, a look of wary curiosity on his face. He had come because the invitation was irresistible, a summons from a ghost. He expected to see a broken man. The man standing by the curved glass was not broken. Julian Croft was terrifyingly calm. The wild emotional rage of the gala was gone, replaced by an arctic stillness that was far more intimidating. Julian Damien began adopting his familiar tone of faux concern. I was horrified when I heard. If there's anything I can do, save it. Damien. Julian cut him off, his voice low and even. He didn't turn to face him yet, continuing to gaze out at the city. Let's talk about Project Nightingale. The name hit Damien like a physical blow. He stiffened his carefully composed mask, twitching. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Julian finally turned his eyes, locking onto Damien's. It was a good name. Poetic. A callback to the first time I beat you. The first time I took something you thought was yours. You've been nursing that grudge for a decade, haven't you? The pod reached its apex 135 meters above the ground. Below, the world looked like a map. They were suspended between the heavens and the earth in a glass bubble of truth. You found my weakness. Julian continued, taking a slow step forward. It wasn't money or power. It was pride. The fear that I wasn't good enough, that the life I had was too perfect, that I didn't deserve Isabella. And you played on it like a virtuoso. Damien's facade began to crack. You're delusional. Grief has clearly scrambled your mind. My mind is clearer than it has ever been, Julian countered. Let me tell you what I see. I see a man so consumed by envy that he decided to destroy a life rather than build his own. You couldn't beat me in the boardroom, so you crept into my home, into my marriage, into my head. He took another step. The pod was not large. There was nowhere for Damien to retreat. You hired your cousin, Dr. Aris Thorne. Julian stated not as a question, but as a fact. A geneticist with a gambling problem and a mountain of debt. £100,000, was it? To falsify a DNA report, to make me believe my own child was a stranger growing inside the woman I love. Damien's face went pale. You have no proof. Proof. A small, cold smile touched Julian's lips. Proof is for courts. This is for me. Marcus found your cousin an hour ago at the Luton airport trying to board a one-way flight to Macau. Dr. Thorne has a terrible fear of heights and enclosed spaces. He's a very talkative man when he's uncomfortable. He kept a copy of all your correspondence, by the way. An insurance policy. He signed a full confession half an hour ago. The last of Damien's composure shattered. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, terrified sheen. You can't prove anything in court. It's inadmissible. I don't need a court, Damien, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. You wanted to see my empire fall. Well, you succeeded. My stock is in the gutter. The board has ousted me. My name is synonymous with disgrace. I have nothing left to lose. He gestured to the glass floor of the pod. We're a long way up. Accidents happen. A scuffle between two distraught business rivals. A tragic fall. The media would love that story, wouldn't they? It has a certain symmetry. Terror, pure and primal, flashed in Damien's eyes. He finally saw the man in front of him, not as the disgraced fool from the gala, but as a predator who had been stripped of everything but his rage. He stumbled backward, pressing himself against the far side of the pod. "You're insane," he stammered. "You made me this way," Julian said, his voice laced with cold fury. "You turned my love into a weapon against me. You threatened my child. My wife had to go on international television and discuss the intimate details of our life just to undo the damage you caused. You didn't just attack my business, you defiled my family." Julian stood inches from him now. The silence in the pod was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the machinery and Damien's ragged breathing. Julian raised his hand, the same hand that had struck Isabella. Damien flinched violently, cowering like a dog. But Julian didn't strike him. He simply let his hand hang in the air for a moment before slowly lowering it. "Beating you would be a release. And you don't deserve one," Julian said, his voice filled with contempt. "Your punishment won't be a moment of pain. It will be a lifetime of it. The confession, the evidence, it's already been sent to the Serious Fraud Office, the Financial Conduct Authority, and every major news outlet on the planet. Your assets will be frozen by morning. Your reputation will be incinerated. Every friend you have will desert you. You'll be the pariah. You'll be me, but without the slightest chance of redemption." The pod began its descent. The view of London rushed back into focus. "Your revenge was a masterpiece of destruction, Damien. I'll give you that," Julian said, stepping back and turning to watch the city reappear. "But you forgot one thing. When you burn a man's entire world down, you've got to make sure he's in it. All you did was clear the land for me to build something new. Now get out of my sight." As the pod doors opened with a gentle hiss, Marcus was waiting. Damien Thorne, a man who had walked in radiating arrogance, stumbled out a ghost in a 1,000-pound suit. He didn't look at Julian. He walked zombie-like into the arms of two plain-clothed police officers who were waiting for him just beyond the barriers. Julian watched him go, feeling not satisfaction, but a profound emptiness. He had won the war, but the battle that truly mattered was yet to come. He had to face Isabella. The chosen location was a world away from the cold marble of courtrooms and the sterile glass of corporate offices. Julian met her in the Princess of Wales Conservatory at Kew Gardens. Outside, a typically grey and melancholic London sky wept a fine drizzle onto the manicured lawns. But inside the glasshouse, it was another world. The air was warm, thick and alive with the humid scent of damp earth, exotic blossoms, and slow, patient growth. It was Isabella's choice, a neutral territory, a place of life to confront the death of their trust. Julian walked through the glass doors connecting the dry, arid zone to the tropical orchid display where she was waiting. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and suffocating. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the serene quiet of the conservatory. He had faced down hostile boards, ruthless competitors, and a global media firestorm. But that was all armor and artifice. This was different. This required a nakedness of the soul he wasn't sure he possessed. He saw her standing by a display of phalaenopsis orchids, their delicate, moth-like petals a stark white against the lush green foliage. She wasn't looking at him, but at the flowers, her profile silhouetted against the bright, diffused light of the glass panes. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress that did little to conceal the prominent, beautiful curve of her pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no jewelry. There was a stillness about her, a formidable serenity, that was entirely new. The fragile, heartbroken woman from the Savoy was gone. In her place stood a queen in exile, surveying the ruins of her kingdom with a sorrowful but unbreakable resolve. He stopped a dozen feet away, the distance feeling like an impassable chasm. Every rehearsed apology, every carefully constructed sentence he had prepared evaporated into the humid air. All that was left was the horrifying, simple truth of his failure. Issa, he began his voice, a dry, unfamiliar rasp. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet space. She turned slowly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw a flicker of the woman he had danced with in Tuscany, the woman whose laughter was his favorite sound. But it was immediately guarded, replaced by a calm, appraising look. It was the look of someone studying a historical artifact, trying to understand how something so precious could have been so thoroughly broken. There was no hatred in her eyes, which was somehow worse. Hatred was a fire you could fight. This was a deep, glacial sadness. I know he started again, forcing the words out. I know that the word sorry is an insult to what I did. It's a word for spilling coffee, not for shattering a life. My life. Your life. Ours. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands clenched at his sides to stop them from shaking. There is no excuse. I want you to hear that. There are reasons, a sickness in my own mind, a poison poured by another man. But there is no excuse. Damien Thorne didn't raise his hand to you. My pride did. My insecurity did. I did. I looked at you, the purest thing in my life, and I chose to believe a lie fabricated by the ugliest parts of the world. I chose to believe it over the evidence of every day I ever spent with you. That is my sin, and mine alone. He let the confession hang in the air, heavy and absolute. He didn't beg, didn't plead for understanding. He simply stated the truth of his guilt. Isabella listened, her expression unreadable. She walked slowly from the orchids to a simple wooden bench and sat down, her hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly. She looked at him for a long, silent moment before she spoke, her voice as quiet as the drizzle outside. Do you know what the worst part was, Julian? She asked, her voice steady, but laced with a profound tremor of memory. It wasn't the slap itself. The sting on my cheek was gone in an hour. The humiliation. That was a firestorm, but fires eventually burn out. The worst part, the part that plays in my mind when I try to sleep, was the 2 seconds before. It was the look in your eyes. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. I looked at my husband, the father of the child, moving inside me, and I saw a stranger. I saw a look of pure, undiluted hatred. You looked at me, at this baby, as if we were a contamination, a disease you needed to violently expel from your perfect life. In that moment, you didn't just hit at me. You erased me. You erased everything we had ever been. How do I ever unsee that? How does our child grow up knowing his father was capable of looking at his mother that way? Her questions weren't attacks. They were genuine points of inquiry from a soul in agony. And they pierced him more deeply than any shout could have. You can't, he whispered, the admission tearing at his throat. You can never unsee it. And I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to prove that the man you saw in that moment is dead. I killed him. Because if I don't, then I have no right to even breathe the same air as you and our child. He walked to the bench opposite her and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on it. The sound of it landing was definitive. I came here today not to ask for forgiveness. I have no right to it. I came to begin my atonement. He pushed the folder across the table. This is a legal transfer ratified this morning. Half of my entire personal fortune, everything that wasn't tied up in Nexus dynamics, has been placed into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries are you and our child. It is yours, untouchable by me, by the company, by anyone. It is security. It is freedom. It is a pathetic attempt to repair a fissure in the universe, but it's the only tool I have. He then slid a single sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. It was his formal, undated resignation as CEO of Nexus Dynamics. The board wants me back. To them, the scandal is manageable now that Thorn is exposed. But their opinion doesn't matter. Only yours does. If you want me to walk away to disappear from public life entirely, I will sign this right now, and it's done. If you want me to stay to rebuild the company and secure a legacy for our child, I will do that. The power is yours, Isabella. I am surrendering it to you completely. You will decide my future. Isabella looked from the folder to the resignation letter and finally back to his face. She saw no manipulation there, only the raw, desolate landscape of a man who had finally understood the totality of his failure. Power is what broke you, Julian, she said softly. The fear of losing it. The arrogance of having it. I don't want that power. She pushed the resignation letter back towards him. A legacy for our child needs a father, not a ghost. Rebuild it, but rebuild it as a better man. She took a deep breath. I'm using some of the funds to start a foundation. I'm calling it the Nightingale Foundation. It will provide legal and psychological support for victims of complex harassment and reputational attacks. I'm taking the ugliest thing that ever happened to me, and I am turning it into a shield for other people. He could only nod, overwhelmed by her strength and grace. But you cannot come home, she said, her voice gaining a new firmness. It was the final condition, the one that mattered most. Not now. Maybe not for a very long time. I need to feel safe. Our child needs to be born into a house of peace, not a house of ghosts. I need to heal. And you? You are broken, Julian. You need to fix yourself. Not for me. For you. You will seek intensive therapy. You will excavate every dark, insecure corner of your soul. And you will understand, truly, understand why you were fertile ground for such poison. You will become a man who is stronger than his own pride. Until you are that man, you will be a visitor in your child's life. A loving, supportive, but distant one. It wasn't a life sentence, but it was a long and lonely exile. It was also just. It was merciful. It was more than he deserved. I will, he vowed, his voice thick with unshed tears. Anything. Whatever it takes. A fragile silence settled between them again. This time, Isabella broke it. She stood up and slowly walked towards him. He braced himself, not knowing what to expect. She stopped in front of him, and with a courage that stunned him, she reached out, took his hand, the same hand that had struck her, and gently placed it flat against her stomach. The warmth of her skin, of the life beneath it, was a shock to his system. And then it happened. A tiny, decisive, living pulse fluttered against his palm. A kick. His breath caught in his throat. A single tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. He looked from his hand on her belly to her face. A faint, watery smile touched her lips, a mirror of his own. It was not a smile of joy or forgiveness, but one of shared, profound, and heart-breaking humanity. It was the first light after a long and terrible storm. The path to redemption was a vast, uncharted wilderness. But in that moment, with his hand on his wife and his child kicking within, he knew he had finally found the first step. The story of Julian and Isabella isn't just a drama about the rich. It's a powerful lesson about trust betrayal and the devastating impact of lies. It shows how even the strongest love can be poisoned from the outside. But it also reveals the incredible strength it takes to fight back, not with vengeance, but with truth. Their journey is far from over. Can a man who committed such a public sin ever truly atone for it? Can a woman's trust, once so completely shattered, ever be rebuilt? Their future, and the future of their child, hangs in the balance. What do you think? Should Isabella eventually forgive Julian completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story